Welcome to Restless Heart Media, an apostolate of the Oblates of St. Augustine. It's thanks to our generous benefactors that we can provide you with this online content to inspire and nurture your growth in the interior life, and to preserve for the Church a traditional form of the Augustinian religious life. Mass is offered weekly for our generous benefactors, as well as our divine office and our daily sacrifices. To share in our mission and graces, you can visit www.oblatesofstaugustine.org/giving. God bless. We're able to live the spiritual life, or whether we're able to imitate Christ's life.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to one more new episode as Father Martin and I go through Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales using the Baronius Press edition right here. How are you, Father?
Doing well, Alberto. How are you?
Doing very well. Very excited for this upcoming episode because, as we say pretty much every single time before we start doing the show, we always say this is going to be a short episode. And then like 2 hours later, we're like, oh, that was an hour and a half episode. But today we are going back to the third part of the introduction. We are going to start on, or not only start, but cover today. We are covering chapter 39 of the third part of the introduction of the honorableness of the marriage bed. So pretty much in a nutshell, we will cover this one chapter today. Hopefully give you all a little bit of a break after our last episode was pretty long. And then we will take it right up in chapter 40, next episode, Counsels for Widows, as we, God willing, wrap out the third part of the introduction. So with that being said, let's get right to it. As I said, chapter 39 of the honorableness of the marriage bed. Father, take it from here.
The marriage bed must be undefiled, as the apostle says, that is to say, exempt from immodesty and other defilements. Thus was marriage first instituted in the earthly paradise, where, until the time of the fall, there is no disorder of concupiscence in it, nor anything dishonorable. There is a certain resemblance between the pleasures of the flesh and those of eating, for both of them relate to the flesh, although the former, by reason of their brutish vehemence, are alone called carnal. I will therefore explain what I cannot say of the former by what I shall say of the latter. So he basically wants to talk about the sins of the flesh without getting without needing certain vocabulary. So he relates eating, gluttony, to lust, and so he's going to talk to us about gluttony, so that he can say what we need to understand through gluttony, through food.
So he speaks a little bit, Father, about the fall. Our daughter was asking me. I think I mentioned this in the other episode, but she was asking me, why do mosquitoes bite? She had just gotten bitten by a lot of mosquitoes, like a lot. And so then I explained to her how before the fall, things were not as such. There was not this necessary enmity between man and animals. And so it's going to be a little bit similar with the different state of how man was created and then what happens after the fall. So Just interesting that St. Francis touches on that. So as you mentioned, we'll start speaking about eating. Eating is ordained for the preservation of life. Now, just as eating merely to nourish and preserve life is a thing that is good, holy, and commanded, so what is requisite in marriage for the procreation of children and the multiplication of persons is a thing that is good and very holy, for it is the principal end of marriage.
All right, so we can have a lot to address there, because it's kind of huge. Well, ever since the pontificate of Paul VI and his publication of Humanae Vitae, especially in the Novus Ordo Church, Humanae Vitae is held on a pedestal. It's held on a pedestal. Many bishops, even pro-life bishops, celebrate the document, anniversary and anniversary mass for Humana Vitae, because Humana Vitae condemned the use of artificial contraception. However, another thing that Humana Vitae also did was very much downplayed, not only well, not only seemed to obscure what the principal end of marriage was, but also downplayed the moral gravity of um, being fruitful. Previously, the traditional teaching of the church was that the procreation and the education was the principal and the primary end of marriage. Since Humana Vitae, and in additionally the Theology of the Body by John Paul II, um, what seems to be the principal end of marriage is rather the second end, the mutual help of the spouses. But also, in addition to that, in Theology of the Body, um, what is argued is that the principal end of even the marital act isn't the procreation and education of children, but the mutual self gift. So children keep getting bumped down and bumped down and bumped down and bumped down from being the very reason for which Almighty God gave us, in a sense, holy matrimony, is the procreation and education of children. And so this is a very strong traditional teaching that this is the primary end of marriage. And of course, there's a difference between God's primary end and man's primary end. Obviously, when two young people are growing up, the late teens, early 20s, or whatever else, their main motive is probably companionship. Like they're looking for someone to enjoy the rest of the life with. But even though that may be their principal motive, I mean, it's natural. We're all made to be to be in communion and friendship and relationships with others and all that kind of stuff. No man is an island. Nevertheless, God's principal end of holy matrimony is the procreation and education of children, the propagation of the human race. So this is something that, in one sense, in the introduction of the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales, doesn't necessarily match with John Paul II's Theology of the Body, nor what you may be hearing at your Novus Ordo RCIAs, or just even just your college campus uh, chaplaincy or whatever, because he's probably going off of JP2.
Yeah, there's this very interesting concept, Father. So we hear people don't, particularly women in this one example, but they don't want to have children. They say because it's because labor or pregnancy are so difficult. So that is definitely over exaggerate, and maybe women will get mad at me, but it can't be that bad if thousands of years, and yes, thousands of years after humanity started, we are still here. It just really is not that bad. And
That's
yes, it is. And me being a man, yes, it's easy for me to say because precisely I don't have any emotional attachments to labor whatsoever. So it can't be that bad if we are still here. If it was that bad, poison, we don't eat it. Stuff
yeah.
that is bad for us, we know that it's bad for us and we don't have it. However, how is it possible that labor can be that bad and we are still here thousands of years later? Not billions, thousands.
Right.
That's one. But Father, we have the curse of Eve is a pain of child labor, and the curse of man is to work, is to toil, and
Mhm.
and that is difficult. In modern days, we glorify working
Mhm.
and we downplay the importance of you know birth, of having
Yeah.
children. So that's very interesting. I just thought about that. Why is it that, and this is just a rhetorical question, why is it that the curse of Adam is glorified? Working is like the highest good. If you are working, and that means that you are hustling and that you are worthy and so on and so forth, that is glorified. To the and we sacrifice the liturgical life, the prayer life, and so on and so forth for working, for the curse of Adam. But when it comes to the curse of Eve, that is pretty much like downplayed.
Well, probably because, I mean, virtue is the middle between two extremes, and so in a sense, you can fall off the ship from both sides. And so one is over glorification of something, and over glorification, so going in excess, and then the other is denigrating something to the point of I don't know what the opposite of excesses, but lesser than what it should be. And so both are extremes. One is extreme too much, and the other is an extreme too little. That's one. That's definitely yeah, you're right. One thing I did want to suggest though, there's this book called The Family Under Attack, a philosophical and theological defense of human society by Don Pietro Leone. It has everything you you need to know in a very concise in very concise arguments about the topic that we're discussing today. Most especially a very strong critique of theology of the body. I think Urati Cheli even had permission to publish that in an article, so you could probably research that article on Urati Cheli. But also maybe what may pertain later in this episode is me going through the five morally licit reasons, or the six morally licit reasons for which one can, in one sense, deny the marital debt, and one of those being the extreme danger to one's life and health. So, if maybe somewhere in the episode we find a good spot to fit that in.
Oh yeah, definitely. That you're going to make father all the noble sort of wives go purchase a book so they can then master master that specific section.
put a poster on their wall with all the different.
It's like at the work environments they make, you have to put the posters where you list out everything so that you don't forget. Like in mass you have the altar cards, so you have easy access there. They're
Right.
going to do that. Continuing on with point number 2.
To eat, not for the preservation of life, but in order to preserve that mutual intercourse and condescension which we owe one to another, is a very just and right thing. And in the same way, the mutual and legitimate satisfaction of husband and wife is called by St. Paul a debt, but a debt so binding that he will not allow one of the parties to abstain from rendering it without the free and voluntary consent of the other, not even for the sake of exercises of devotion, that is to say, for time for prayer. Which led me to say the word which I said on the subject in the chapter on Holy Communion. How much less, then, may either party excuse himself from rendering the debt to the other from fanciful pretensions to virtue, or from anger and scorn?
So Father St. Paul, as you just read it, calls it a debt. And then I'll repeat what you just read. But a debt so binding that he will not allow one of the parties to abstain from rendering it without the free and voluntary consent of the other. This is a interesting little use of words here, Father. So he says that one of the parties is allowed from render to abstain from rendering it, I'm inverting it, with the free and voluntary consent of the other. So that would be to say, if there is anybody that may be a little bit scrupulous there. So if one of the parties requests the debt, and then the other one does not want to render it, and as you just mentioned, there are valid reasons that we can study and look at and all of that, then the party that requested it can then basically say, okay, that is a valid reason, and then so it's not necessarily a scrupulosity thing where it's like once it's requested, it cannot be revoked, so to
Right.
speak.
Right. There are some limitations, reasonable and just limitations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can manipulate them to where every single time that there's a request is because I have a headache or something. It doesn't work.
Yes. Moving on to number 3. As those who eat from the duty of mutual intercourse should eat freely and not as it were by constraint, and moreover should try to show some appetite, so the marriage that should always be rendered faithfully, freely, and just as if it were with the hope of begetting children, even though for some reason there may be no such hope. This takes me back to, forgetting the exact name of the encyclical by Pope Pius the 11th.
Castani Konubi.
Yes, there we go. So this is where we get into a little bit of the controversy, Father, with uh, between like the Humana Vitae NFP
Hmm.
situation and then the traditional Catholic view. So correct me if I'm wrong, Father. The way that I understand it, based on Casasicanubi, is that if you are doing NFP, even though it's a just basically following the natural process, if you are doing NFP with the goal of saying, okay, I'm going to find out which days it's not possible or extremely unlikely for me to get pregnant, and we are going to do the marital act on such a day for that specific reason, then we can get into the little gray areas. Am I right?
Well, one of the things that's different between the natural method, which is something that even Pius XII proposed, or said was morally illicit, versus NFP is one is the understanding of the marital act itself. Like I mentioned earlier, was that in the traditional teaching, it was always understood by both parties and by all Catholics that the principal purpose of the marital act was the procreation of children. For NFP, of course, there's a whole theology surrounding it. So it's not just like a certain small little teaching about the marital act. There's a whole theological understanding of even the uh, anthropological, the human person, and also the principal end of marriage. So it's not just just a moral permission to do a particular act, but there's a whole theology around it. So that's what there's theology of the body that surrounds NFP. Um, but Pope Pius XII said that there were grave reasons in which some can suspend this um, hope for a period of time, even a prolonged period of time. But that he listed some very serious reasons. Um, NFP, however, because it made the procreation of children like a secondary end to the marital act, says you could prolong it for basically whatever reason you want. So, like, if you just want to, enjoy your 20s, oh yeah, just NFP your entire 20s and just don't conceive any children. The difference between the traditional understanding of the natural method versus the more modern NFP is that the traditional method still prioritized and glorified larger families, whereas NFP glorifies mutual self gift. And so that's the one of the main issues between NFP and the traditional teaching. Um, but also, yeah, but it's like the hopeful. How do you put it? The hopeful, the hope of begetting children. Um, yeah, I mean that the traditional teaching still even when one um, doesn't want to conceive for a particular grave reason. If one prolongs it without a grave reason, Pope Pius XII even says that it's grave matter. In other words, it's a mortal sin to do so. Whereas theology of the body and NFP don't even suggest the idea that it could possibly be a mortal sin.
Now, to be clear, Father, I'll just bring up briefly the difference between chastity and celibacy, right? So
Hmm.
celibacy is not being married.
Hmm.
Chastity, even married people are called to be chaste.
Hmm.
So priests are celibate and chaste,
And
and
hopefully,
but chastity exactly. But just because you're married doesn't mean that you're not that we are not still called to practice chastity. So then what we are speaking about here as far as being morally sinful is if somebody says, well, we are going to just basically keep engaging in the marital act with the purpose of not procreating with that specific purpose, then that's it. If you're observing a period of chastity, then it's a little bit different. Am I right, Father?
yeah. Say for there's mutual consent to fast during Lent. Perfectly fine. Even St. Paul counsels refraining from the act for certain time periods in order to pray. Um, and even then, St. Thomas Aquinas says that there's three levels of merit that we're talking about here. So the highest level of merit is engaging in the marital act precisely to conceive. That's the highest form of merit. The second level of merit is engaging because you're giving the marital debt. You're giving the marital debt. The third, which there's no merit, is simply just engaging it for the sake of sensual pleasure, and that's the next thing that St. Francis de Sales addresses. Restless Heart Media is funded by your generous financial support. Visit www.oblatesofstaugustine.org/giving to become a patron. Restless Heart Media. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you.
All right, moving on to our next point, number 4. By the way, we are using the Baronius Press edition of Introduction to the Devout Life. We are currently, in this episode, if you just joined us, going through chapter 39 of the Honorableness of the Marriage Bed, and we are specifically toward the bottom of page 221. Point number 4, to eat, not for the two former reasons, but merely to satisfy the appetite, is permissible, but not praiseworthy. For the mere pleasure of the sensual appetite cannot be an end sufficient in itself to make an action praiseworthy. It is enough if it is permissible.
So there you go. He's in agreement with St. Thomas Aquinas there.
Point number 5, to eat. This is at page 222 for those following along. Point number 5, to eat not from mere appetite but to excess and immoderately is more or less blameworthy according as the excess is great or small. Point number 6. Now, excess in eating consists not only in eating too much, but also in the way and manner of eating. It is a remarkable thing, dear Philotea, that honey, which is so proper and wholesome a food for bees, may nevertheless be so harmful to them that sometimes it makes them ill, as when they eat too much of it in the springtime, for it gives them the flux, and sometimes causes them to die irremediably, as when they become covered with honey all over the head and forepart of their body. Of a truth, nuptial intercourse, which is so holy, so just, so commendable, so useful to the commonwealth, is nevertheless in some cases dangerous to those who make use of it, for sometimes it makes their souls very sick with venial sin, as happens by simple excess, and sometimes it causes them to die of mortal sin, as happens when the order established for the procreation of children is violated and perverted, in which case such sins are always mortal, and they are more or less detestable according as one departs more or less from this order.
Right.
For
And
inasmuch as the procreation of children is the first and principal end of marriage, it is never lawful to depart from the order established for this purpose, though for some accidental cause conception may not be possible, as happens when barrenness or pregnancy prevents procreation and generation. For in such cases, the bodily intercourse does not cease to be capable of being just and holy, provided that the loss of generation be preserved, for no circumstances ever make it lawful to transgress a law which the principal end of marriage has imposed. There's a lot, and I'll read the next couple of sentences, the rest of the paragraph, because it's all relevant. Of a truth, the shameful and execrable act committed by Onan in his marriage was detestable in the sight of God, as the Holy Text says in the 38th chapter of Genesis. And although certain heretics of our age, 100 times more to be blamed than the cynics of whom St. Jerome speaks when commenting on the epistle to the Ephesians, have tried to prove that it was the perverse intention of this wicked man which displeased God, the scripture nevertheless speaks quite otherwise and asserts emphatically that the thing itself which he did was detestable and abominable in the sight of God. And we're not going to go into that specific detail of what he did, as we're trying to keep it as family friendly as possible. This would be found in chapter 38 of Genesis.
so he says, is nevertheless in some cases dangerous to those who make use of it, for sometimes it makes their souls very sick with venial sin. If you remember back in our earlier episodes in another chapter regarding this, he particularly said that this act, while being good and holy, is a powerful medicine, powerful medicine for the as a remedy for concupiscence. And so if you can think like morphine or oxycontin or something, you're only allowed very small doses of this, because when you get too much doses of it, it could actually, rather than taking away pain, can cause your body a lot of damage. And so likewise, while it may be permissible in marriage and morally good and holy and just, the heart, the intentions, can pervert its use in such a way that while externally you can be seemingly committing a morally good act, internally what it's doing to you could be causing much harm. And so it's in other words, not a free for all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a free for all as they would have us believe nowadays. And the truth is, Father, that a lot of Novus Ordo priests, and as the audience of the show knows, this is the point of this show is not to speak about modern versus new or any of those errors, or to criticize even the Novus Ordo. Really, that's not the point of the show. But we do have to bring up that there is even danger, and I have personally, has not happened to me, but I have heard of Novus Ordo priests in confession telling teenagers or people that are not necessarily fully mature in their spiritual life that certain things that have to do with this specific topic are fine because of whatever reason that they make up themselves to be. So it is very serious, and there are a lot of those sort of priests that are telling married people that certain things are allowed which are not allowed. And as the scripture tells us, Father, it is imperative that we get educated on these points, because if the blind leads the blind, both fall from the pit. And these are things that are have to deal with nature. So if you're Catholic, really, there's really no way that you can just close your eyes and then just go according to whatever such and such Father such and such may have told you. When it comes to these things that are very grave and very serious, as Saint Francis, who usually stays away, Father, from using language such as this specifically is a mortal sin. He is very clear, so it is a very serious topic.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Moving on to page number, yes, page 223, point number 7. It is a true mark of a beggarly, mean, abject, and base spirit to think of the dishes and the feeding before the time of the repast, and more so still when afterwards one is taken up with the pleasure which one has had in the meal, dwelling upon it in words and thoughts, and allowing one's mind to wallow in the remembrance of the pleasure enjoyed in swallowing down the mouthfuls, as do those who before dinner have their mind fastened on the spit, and after dinner on the dishes, persons fit to be scullions who, as St. Paul says, make a god of their belly. Again, nothing that we see this a lot these days, and nothing of this is new. It has always been so. Persons of honor do not think of the table until they sit down to it, and afterwards they wash their hands and mouth in order to lose both the taste and the smell of what they have eaten. The elephant is only a huge animal, but he is the most worthy beast that lives on the earth and the most intelligent. I will give you an instance of his excellence. He never changes his mate, and tenderly loves the one of his choice, with whom nevertheless he mates but every third year, and then for 5 days only, and so secretly that he has never been seen to do so. But he is seen again on the 6th day, on which, before doing anything else, he goes straight to some river, wherein he bathes his whole body, for he has no wish to return to the herd until he has purified himself. Are not these excellent and modest traits in such a beast, by which he invites married persons not to allow their affections to remain attached to the pleasures of sense which they have experienced in accordance with their state of life, but when these are past, to wash their heart and affection of them, and to purify themselves of them as soon as possible, that afterwards they may perform other actions which are more spiritual and lofty? A lot there. And then continuing on, in this counsel consists the perfect practice of the excellent doctrine which St. Paul gives to the Corinthians. The time is short, it remains that they who have wives be as if they had none. For according to St. Gregory, he has a wife as if he had none, who takes bodily consolations with her in such a way that he is not thereby diverted from spiritual aims, and what is said of the husband is understood reciprocally of the wife. Let those that use this world be as if they used it not, says the same apostle.
So yeah, this is a good place to stop with all this information. But especially for those who are kind of trying to discern their state of life, this is extremely helpful in the sense that marriage in this context is supposed to help one grow in chastity. It's not supposed to be this ultimate relaxation of an expression of a desire, so to speak. So like, just because you're married doesn't your obligation to grow in chastity cease. But as St. Francis de Sales again said in an earlier chapter, marriage could possibly make chastity even harder for those who engage in it in the wrong way. And so, especially if you're courting or dating somebody, it's important to recognize that this person has to demonstrate chastity in order so that your marriage and your relationship isn't affected in a very negative way due to a lack of love for the virtue of chastity. So that's especially when you have situations where you're alone together or something. It's very important to be chaste yourself, but also discern whether the other person can be chaste as well. If a person cannot, then this is should be kind of a warning flag, a red flag, and whether or not this person is capable of living a marriage that is in pursuant of virtue and pursuant towards the ends for which God established marriage, rather than just again just mutual affection for one another, and then yeah, sure, will that marriage leads us to holiness is a second best thing. It's a bonus points. No, this is the purpose, not bonus points.
Let all then use the world, each one according to his calling, but in such a way that by not setting his affection upon it, he may be as free and ready to serve God as if he made no use of it at all. It is man's great ill, says St. Augustine, to wish to enjoy those things which he should only use, and to wish to use those things which he should only enjoy. We must enjoy spiritual things and only use corporeal things, for when our use of the latter is changed into mere enjoyment. Our rational soul is also changed into one that is brutish and bestial. I think I have said all that I wished to say and have made clear without saying it that which I do not wish to say.
And that which he did not wish to say, we said. So,
There we go. So that's chapter 39. So we wrapped up chapter 39 of the third part of the introduction. Next episode, we will take it up on chapter 40, counsels for widows, and then a word to virgins, which is just like one paragraph. Anything else to say, Father, before we finish up the show today?
of course, I have the one thing to say that everyone's been waiting the entire episode to hear: the 6 things. Okay, the 6 things that excuse from rendering the debt are: 1. Adultery on the part of one's consort. The adultery must be certain and committed with knowledge and consent. Thus, no excuse arises if one's partner has been raped or if the crime has been pardoned, example, by voluntary rendering the debt in spite of the knowledge of the adultery. Number 2, non-support of wife and children. If the husband squanders his income and compels his wife to provide for their livelihood, she need not render the marriage debt. But if the family must live in poverty through no fault of the husband, there is no reason for refusing the debt. Neither does the circumstance that more children would necessitate greater restrictions on the family constitute such a reason, which is that's important for people to understand, is that just because more kids cost more money, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily refuse the marital debt. 3, lack of the use of reason on the part of the petitioner. Hence, the marriage debt may, but need not, be rendered to the insane, nor to the completely intoxicated. Number 4, a unreasonable demand. This is principally the case when one party desires such frequent rendering of the debt that the constitution of the other suffers greatly. Judgment should be passed by a conscientious physician. Number 5, great danger to health or life. And this might be seen more often than not when doctors tell women that pregnancy might cause severe complications and probably put their health in severe risk and possibly their life. So such a danger would be given in the case of gravely infectious diseases, of a very weak heart, etc. And that actually, I've heard that in men too. Men have heart conditions that if they engage in the marital act, it could cause death. The ordinary hardships of pregnancy, and this is what we were addressing earlier. The ordinary hardships of pregnancy, childbirth, nursing, and care of children, such as intense but brief pains, prolonged but mild headaches, etc., are not a sufficient excuse. Neither is the fear of a miscarriage or stillbirth, which the wife knows from experience will follow conception. And then, last but not least, number 6, spiritual welfare. And I won't go into those because I don't know how I can get around the words. So there you go. There's 6 things that everybody's wanted to know about, so to speak, in the case, because it's not this absolute thing, but again, this comes from Moral Theology by Father Herbert Joan. It's published by Tan Press. It's only like a $13 to $15 book from Tan. It's basically he wanted to create a 1-volume moral theology manual for parish priests to have there. It was written to be 1 volume because there's not a whole lot of explanations for the moral reasoning behind these, but he just wanted to provide a book, a concise book with just the answers. And so it's a very it'll be a quick read. Won't give you too much explanation, but for questions or whatever else, it's pretty useful and helpful. So
Great. Thank you so much, Father, for sharing those. I'm sure that those will be very useful for everybody watching. As you all know, this series, we are following Introduction to the Devout Life, the Brownies Press Edition. It's still not too late to acquire it if you desire to follow along. There's a lot still that we are going to be doing. This is a production of Restless Hearts Media and Apostolate of the Oblast of St. Augustine. Please make sure to subscribe, to like, to share this video, share it with everybody that you know so that people can find the great treasure that St. Francis has left for us in this book. That, Father, a lot of people have this book. They have it on their shelves.
mm-hmm.
And then they're out there saying stuff that contradicts what a doctor of the church has said. That's why it's important to not only to have these books on our shelves, but to pick them up, read them, so that way when you're having conversations about the faith, which happens very often, either online or in person, you can say, "Oh, I think St. Francis says such a thing," and that carries the authority of him being a doctor of the church. But anyway, share this video. Again, donate to the Orders of St. Augustine. If you don't do anything else, donate to the Orders of St. Augustine, who are trying to keep the tradition of the church alive in the monastic life. Father, anything else to say before we wrap up the episode?
That's it. God bless. See you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching another video on Restless Heart Media. You can take part in providing more spiritually nourishing content by supporting our monastery. Visit www.oblatesofstaugustine.org/giving. God bless.